Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I'm Adrian Fort.
And I'm Dalton Gentry.
And we are here with something special today. A brand spanking new tag. Dalton, what is it?
This is your project here. This is the Badass Poetry 101 tag.
Oh, yeah. Now look, there is several problems here. I can't read with these goddamn things on. But the badass part's why we got the guns.
Okay, I've got two guns.
And why we got the guns, baby.
Oh, look at that. Pandering to the crowd. I can't do this with these.
Do it.
So
do it.
I'm just going to hold them. Just going to hold them.
So there's not much poetry on Booktube.
This is true. And
we've heard time and again, when mentioning poetry, people say they don't know where to start.
Yes.
So we're going to try to give people some place to start. Another problem, men don't feel like they can poetry.
Exactly. We've said this too many times.
Yes.
The men are left out in the world of poetry. So let's man up poetry.
They feel that and you know, it's an easy trap to fall into. Men are supposed to be stoic, right?
Yes.
And poetry is about emotion, right?
Yes.
So it's an easy trap to fall into. Another thing, that poetry is singular. It seems that a lot of people think that poetry is a thing as opposed to something. But this is something that is expansive and multiple, not singular. It is not simply emotion. It is not simply crying onto a page, right?
There's so much more to poetry, and poetry doesn't get the credit for it, especially in Booktube, especially in the literary community. So let's man up poetry.
Therefore, we will ruin everything.
Absolutely.
And be presenting poetry as action movie stars.
Adrian.
Yes.
Question 1.
Number 1, Sylvester Stallone. A self-made original who has been doing it for decades. What is the first poem you remember?
I'm reaching way back to childhood here. I was going to go Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
Shel Silverstein. Do you remember Shel?
You son of a bitch.
Did you do Shel Silverstein?
Yes!
Dude, look at that. The first one I remember is, I think it's called The Rain. I'm not sure if that's the name of it, but I looked into the sky and I saw the rain, and it dripped into my head and flowed into my brain.
Huh.
That's the first poem I remember.
I'm going way back to the second grade with Shel Silverstein. I believe it was the second grade. It's hard for me to really remember, right? Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Yes.
Now, I thought this was... Here's... Young Adrian was very serious, just like old man Adrian is very serious. And I read Where the Sidewalk Ends and just thought it was silly. And then I spent the rest of the day thinking about it.
As Adrian tends to do.
That little bit of play with something that is a strange thought. Because young Adrian was so into comic books, right?
Okay.
And comic books can be very serious despite the comic name.
Absolutely.
And when that thought stuck in my head for the rest of the day, the sidewalk ends, you know? That's where I was hooked after that.
And that's where young Adrian's life came to an abrupt halt.
Yes.
Question 2.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's easy to be captivated by Herculean strength and stature combined with boyish charm. What was your first favorite poem?
High school. The first poem that really got me, because it's absurd, it's different, and it wasn't what they had been teaching. William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheelbarrow.
Really?
So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens.
Guess what mine was?
What is that?
I Died for Beauty.
Oh, no.
My sophomore year in high school, we read it. Miss Sedaro's class. I am a 30-year-old man who can still walk you back to the same seat in the same room where I was floored by that poem. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb, when one who died for truth was laid in an adjoining room. He questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied. And I for truth, the two are one, we brethren are, he said. And so as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names.
Nothing more manly than reciting poetry.
You're damn right.
That's fucking beautiful.
It is beautiful.
All right. Next question.
Bruce Lee. The Standard. Hard to argue with this level of excellence. What is the greatest poem you've ever read?
Now, we argued about this one a little bit last week. T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Okay.
April is the cruelest month. That is coupling fine language. It bounces back and forth between the absurd and the classic elements of poetry. It mixes languages. It's beautiful.
Okay.
And it's a long one. It's a long read, and it's a hell of a one to get through. But that's one I would highly suggest for anyone who's wanting to get into poetry.
I've got Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare.
Okay.
Everything is there, including intrigue. Is this about his son? From structure to language to memorability, there is nothing that this poem is lacking. It is truly great on every level.
Fair enough. Who are we moving to next?
4. Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan.
Starring in approximately 4 movies a year since the 1920s, it is nearly impossible to avoid the Chan Man. What poet have you read the most from?
Now, I love Jackie Chan. I have a weird, I get too drunk and watch Drunken Master. It's my favorite thing. Billy Collins. I like Billy Collins. I know you don't. I know he's modern. I know he's popular, but I've read a lot of him.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I am not a fan.
I know. I read you The Best Cigarette one day, and you just hate it, and that's one of my favorite poems.
It's not he's not bad. It's just he doesn't stick with me.
Okay.
He doesn't resonate with me.
All right.
Mine is Charles Bukowski. Now, I know I talk about Emily Dickinson a lot.
Bukowski's wonderful, though.
But Bukowski, I chain smoke Bukowski. I sit down with Bukowski and I go.
Okay.
And I think for me, Bukowski collections have to be read as a novel.
Okay.
You just sit down and you read them, and it's a narrative. 5. Terry Crews, an underutilized potential superstar. Who is one poet you hope to read more from?
When I picked this up, I did a book haul and I had this.
Okay.
This is the Best American Poetry of 2012. So this is fairly recent. The man I would like to read more from is Mark Strand. Now, I read his poem, The Mysterious Arrival of an Unusual Letter. I really enjoyed it. I'd like to hear more from him.
Okay.
So let's get a little new poetry out here, not just the classics.
Mine is new as well. It is Richard Sykin.
Okay.
I read his collection Crush. I think I've talked about it on the channel before. He reads like Polnick and Bukowski had a love child.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's dirty.
Yeah.
I like it.
Can we cut real quick because I didn't bring something on camera?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm an asshole. Might have to put my glasses on to find it. There we go. Never would have seen it. No. How am I going to do this? Good? Yep. 6. Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron?
Charlize, whatever you want to say.
Charlize Theron. A woman whose presence and authority goes unquestioned out of sheer bad-assedness. They are not peers, they are authorities. Who is one female poet you haven't already mentioned in this tag who you feel deserves more attention?
Now that you haven't already mentioned, that tripped me up because I'm like, Adrian's going to do Dickinson. That's all there is to it. I did Sylvia Plath. I like Sylvia Plath, a little more modern, moving in towards the 60s, that era of poetry. But I enjoy her. I think she deserves a worthy mention. You ain't ever going to keep that book up.
No, it's garbage.
Don't read it in the kitchen, but enjoy some Sylvia Plath.
Okay. I would argue that Sylvia Plath is maybe too classic for this question.
Okay.
I went with a poet that I actually have not read.
Really?
Adrienne Rich. I have never read her poetry, but I read Poetry and Commitment,
All right.
which is invaluable insofar as realizing what poetry is and what it can mean and what it can be to you both as a reader and a writer. Now, this has an opening which evokes the Communist Manifesto.
Okay.
It does not only invoke the Communist Manifesto, it rivals it.
That's
But
why Adrian loves it.
I would like to read a quote from page 37. This is very difficult for me without my glasses. She goes from listing a group of poets and says, I don't speak these names, by the way, as a canon. They are voices mingling in a long conversation, a long turbulence, a great, vexed, and often maligned tradition in poetry as in politics. The tradition of radical modernism, which crosses and recrosses the map of poetry. The tradition of those who have written against the silence of their time and location. Without it, in poetry as in politics, our world is unintelligible.
Look at that.
Anyone who is able to put those words together to mean what she just meant, I think is definitely deserving of reading.
Worth a read. Next question.
8. Donnie Yin, a supernova in a foreign action scene whose ageless poetry are you only familiar with through translation?
I had some trouble with this one. I am not as versed in poetry as I'd like to be.
That's the point of the tag.
That's the point of the tag. So I racked my brain. I'm like, something that's been translated that I've read. Beowulf. How many of us have read Beowulf?
Okay.
That's the translation. That's the big one. That's all I could come up with this one.
Okay.
And what more of a manly poem do you need than Beowulf?
Okay. Fight Club. No. A reference to Fight Club, though. Haiku.
Haiku.
I was tempted to list Basho or Basho. I'm not good with names, let alone Far Eastern names. Who's widely credited as the greatest writer of haiku of all time. Instead, I'm going to go with Shiki, who I am absolutely convinced Ezra Pound stole his entire persona and career from.
That's interesting.
I won't go into it here, but if you look into Shiki and you look into Ezra Pound's Ness, you read a little bit about both of them, I think you'll understand what I'm going for. If necessary, I will make a video on it.
Okay.
But it's there.
Alrighty. We'll wrap this one up. What's our last question here?
9. Christian Bale.
Batman.
He's Batman.
He's Batman.
What's the best poetry collection you've made it through?
Now here's another question. I realize that when I buy books for poetry, I don't sit and read the whole thing. I pick and choose. It's hard to do. It is difficult to sit down and read an entire collection of poetry.
Even with Bukowski.
I like Bukowski, but even still, I found myself jumping. I don't know why.
Okay.
However, The Best Cigarette by Billy Collins is a collection of poetry. He did something a little different. He did it on audio CD. Got a lot of flack for it. But it is the author reading his poetry.
Yeah.
And that is one of the best collections I've gone through. You really get what he's going for because it's the man reading what he wrote. He puts the right emphasis in, and it's great to hear.
Now, did you just make it through the audio collection, or did you make it all the way through the actual book?
The audio collection is separate. It is like a collection of his poems that he thought were best and wanted to put in audio commentary.
Right.
I was drawn to it because it is the title of my favorite poem from him. That's what I got for that one.
Okay. Mine is not going to surprise anyone. Charles Bukowski, Pleasures of the Damned.
See, I wanted to use that one, but I'm like, Adrian's got it. He don't take it.
That entire collection, from start to finish, is just gorgeous. It is the thing that poetry is. And it reads like a novel.
It does.
It reads just like a novel. You sit down and you start it and you go. And you get a narrative, you get characters. It is world building. It's just gorgeous, and I don't know how someone does that for an entire collection of poetry.
Understandable.
So,
let's tag some people.
this is a tag. We are moving forward with it. Go ahead and read your tag list.
First and foremost, Ben from the Reading Rejects would like to see you do this tag. I said it's a man on Booktube, which is a rarity in its own.
Yes.
Let's bring some men into the world of poetry.
Okay. Keep going.
Jen Campbell.
We don't have many interactions with Jen. We have no interactions with Jen. But we know that she is big into poetry.
Yep.
We would like to see this.
Another one who we haven't really spoke with very often, but we'd like to see do this tag is Kelly from Kelly Bookspill. We really we're trying to bring people into poetry. It's hard to find somebody and be like, well, they might enjoy it. So let's pull some more people in here.
It's also difficult, and we want to reemphasize this with every tag that we do, not to just sit here and tag the same people over and over again.
Yes.
It's hard to find people who do poetry.
Absolutely.
So we're in a difficult position for this. And we would like to see, since we're tagging you guys, we would like to see who you guys want to tag in this.
Absolutely.
Right? Just to build that community.
Now here's somebody we haven't picked on in a while. but he did a hell of a job in his Simplica Girl Diaries video. Josh from Literary Gladiators.
Yeah.
We think we could knock this one out of the park. We think he would be versed enough to do some poetry videos. We'd love to see his response to this.
And also, anyone else over there at Literary Gladiators?
Oh yeah, there's a whole group of them. Josh is just the guy we're familiar with because we pig on him a little.
He actually has friends, unlike us.
We have David the Poptimist. Now we're picking this man because he did our whiskey and cigar tag and he blew it out of the water.
He did a much better job than we did.
Like, we're sitting here talking about whiskey and cigars and being manly men, and he just shows up and makes us look like shit. And we loved every second. Like, that video killed me.
Yeah, double-barreled us right out of the room.
So, if there's a man I want to see do this man tag, the Poptimist is him. Finally, I have Gene from Bookish Thoughts.
Okay.
Any words on Gene?
Not particularly.
Another person we haven't interacted with very much. We'd like to get in on poetry. I think that'd be great. And see what they can bring to the table.
My first tag will be Rachel Louise Atkin. We've interacted with you a little bit on here. We'd really like to see where you take this. Amy from the Dusty Bookshelf. Mm-hmm. I've never really interacted with you about poetry, but I believe that with all of the stuff that you've read, there's poetry in there someplace. Jesse from Rebel Reads. I know you've talked about Emily Dickinson and about Charles Bukowski. I'm betting that there is a larger canon in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Nash from the Book Bat. Someone we've just started interacting with a little bit. It would be interesting to see where you take this. Also, we're doing a cross-medium tag here with our friend Lauren from Where There's Ink, There's Paper.wordpress.com. Where there's ink, there's paper.wordpress.com.
And we will link that down below.
Yes, that is her blog, and she has said that she will participate in this tag through a blog, which I think is very interesting.
Very interesting.
Lastly, Monse.
Because we can say your name right.
I am worthless. I would love to see you do this tag.
So that's the challenge. You got 9 famous men in the acting field.
Well, 8.
And a woman. Man up poetry a little bit. Get poetry out.
Toughen up poetry a little bit, maybe.
Get poetry in the world of Booktube. That's what this is about. And I guess make it as ridiculous as possible because I feel absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Make sure you hit the like button so we don't feel like such stooges.
And hit the subscribe button, and I assume the dislike button as well. It's going to be a disliker, I have a feeling.
If you hit the like button, does it not allow you to hit the dislike button? Can you like and dislike?
I have no idea. I don't understand how the internet works.
If you do dislike it, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you can see us make stooges of ourselves in the future.
Comment below, let us know your thoughts on our poetry, and we'll be back for more shenanigans like this very soon.